Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Today, I'm going to show you guys the importance of balancing your render latency and your frames per second. Just because you get high FPS doesn't mean your game is running good. Okay, that's a big misconception that people have. And this isn't just for Assetto, this goes across all games, but I specialize in Assetto Corsa with the mods and everything, and content manager, so I'm showing you guys on this game because it's very important. So the first thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm actually just going to quickly lower some settings to lower than I would play with, just for the sake of showing you guys the importance of getting FPS and your render latency. So I'm going to turn extra effects off and we're going to call it good for me. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm not limiting my frame rate here, right? And my monitor does get 180 FPS. It's important to know that when you're pushing higher FPS than your monitor can push and you don't have VSync on and you're not limiting your frame rate, you will get some screen tearing and some artifacting on your screen. So we're going to talk about that later, but for now let's just load into something that's going to get really good performance so we can check our render time. The reason that you want a low render time is because the render latency, the render timing, is going to be responsible for your input lag. So if you're getting 100 FPS and your render time is 30 milliseconds, you're not going to have an accurate one-to-one display of inputs from your controller or wheel into the game. It's going to be delayed. That's the important thing that we have to discuss here, is the main goal that you're looking to get is to have a higher FPS and a lower render latency, or a balance between them. So right now, let me just open up render stats. You're going to see that render stats is a very common thing that we're using across all of my videos. So let's type in render stats, and we're going to be jumping all over the place right now, right? But what's important is that I'm getting 3 milliseconds just above that right now as my render latency, and the FPS is sitting well above what I can push on my monitor. So let's just change it to a daytime real quick just to see if the scattered clouds are going to affect anything for me here. And we look like we're pretty good, okay? So we have higher FPS than my monitor can push. This is going to result in my game screen tearing a bit, but I have a really low render latency. This is going to result in my inputs interacting with the game right away. So let's see what happens now if I exit the game and I limit my frame rate to my monitor's refresh rate, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to limit the frame rate to 170, because that should, in theory, be pushing somewhere at about 180. Let me actually go ahead and toss it to 166. So we're going to go about just more than half less performance here, less than half of the FPS. And we're going to see what happens with the actual render latency now, just from that one little change. So let's go back in here and let's open up render stats again. And now you can see I'm locked at 180 FPS, but my render time is double, okay? But you can also see the graph is way smoother. This is going to result in my game, just from limiting my FPS 10 below my monitor on the same settings, to be way better. The game is going to be smoother. The input latency here, the render latency, is still low enough you're not going to notice that, and you're going to have a great time on the game with a smoother game than you ever had, and you're also going to have really good inputs, and your render stats graph is going to be great. So what happens now if you have, say, a monitor that's 60 Hertz, or you can't push high FPS and you're stuck somewhere around 60? Well, what we can do is we can go ahead and we can limit the frame rate to, say, 50, so it's always trying to push 60. Maybe we'll go 52, so it's always trying to push 62. That should have minimal screen tearing, and you guys with 60 FPS, it'll be fine. So let's load in now at that FPS limited and see what my render latency is. And this is where you guys are having a big problem. The guys that are running lower FPS and limiting their frame rates are dealing with something like this: 18.7 milliseconds render time. This isn't going to be an enjoyable gameplay experience. This is going to cost you not just performance from the actual FPS being under 60, but this is actually going to cause you to have your inputs delayed from when you input them on the wheel or controller to when they register in the game itself. And that's why this is such a big problem. So that's why, to a certain extent, depending on the game you're playing, you want to have a super low render latency and a higher FPS. I've said it many times before. You don't lag while you're driving in real life. You do not stutter in real life. There is no lagging. You know what I'm saying? There's no render time. You're not having issues. You see what you see and everything is perfect. If you can manage to get a really low render time on this game with a higher FPS value, you will have a very smooth, super responsive game. And those times where you think that you hit this controller and it didn't register what you did, or it didn't steer quick enough to when you hit on the wheel or controller, this is what's going to fix that for you guys. That's the importance of balancing your FPS and your render timing. So let's try something for around a 90. Let's go with limiting it at 90 and loading in so it's going to be running around 100. This is what I try to get everybody to be able to run at the bare minimum, is hopefully a solid 90 FPS and a lower render latency. So if we jump from about 55 to 90 FPS, we get 10 milliseconds render latency, which is probably going to be pretty average for a lot of people on a lot of different games. And this is about your happy medium where you're going to have smooth gameplay, responsive inputs, and not have to worry about anything. So for those of you guys that do have budget PCs and think the game is running fine, or people with really good PCs on really high-end graphics sticking at 80 FPS and you think the game is running fine, this is to show you that it's not running fine, but also at the same time not to be condescending, but to show you guys how to fix it and how to get the game to run better. And now if you look at everything after what I just did here, you can see with hard, concrete, non-arguable evidence that this is definitely what you want to shoot for. This is definitely the best way to play the game. And if you want to have really good graphics and you're cutting up and you're just doing it for clips, save it for the replays. You can always go back and turn on good graphics in replays and post really nice graphic TikToks and whatever you guys want without suffering in game trying to get those clips at 30 FPS. Lower the graphics, lower the settings, optimize your PC, get 90 FPS, record and replays at 30 FPS with ultra maxed out graphics. That's the best way to get the best experience out of the actual game, and also get the best experience for having actual reactions to actually feeling driving without any lag or input lag. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Stay gaming. With how long this is going on after, I should just say it again, but I'm not going to. Have a good day, everybody.